Sometimes habits can be good, and sometimes habits can be bad. But moving to the other side of the world isn't going to change your habits, right? Let's face it, some you're actually going to want to lose. G'day guys, my name's Ross, and I moved with my family to Australia during a global pandemic. The first habit I lost when I moved to Australia was I don't really watch the TV anymore. Now you're thinking to yourself, how much TV did you watch in the UK, Ross? And the answer to that is, well, what else is there to do? Especially when the weather is so cold and dreary that you don't really want to be outside anyway. And everything's too expensive. Even the TV license you have to pay for. Don't get me started on the cost of Sky. So when you've spent all of that money and you've got nothing else to do, you find most of your social hours spent feeling your arse grow on the sofa. Now don't get me wrong, British telly is pretty good. And that's probably the reason why I don't watch TV anymore in Australia. Reruns of crap I've already seen, or reality show after reality show that showcases the wonder of Australian tryhards trying to seek influencer status. But I still watch Love Island. Now this next habit I lost was probably one of the bad ones that I'm better off now for not doing. Now the UK weather is pretty undangerous. That's a new word. I mean, they do have storms, and you can get in a bit of a pickle sometimes, but just the general weather, it shouldn't really hurt you. Not like the Australian weather, where even if it looks like a nice day, you could still end up with third-degree burns. So now I don't walk around without a hat. Or sunscreen. Factor 50 sunscreen at that. I don't think I ever used Factor 50 in my life before I moved to Australia. Because the fact is that if you don't use one, or preferably both, on a best case scenario you're going to end up looking like a lobster, but in a worst case scenario you're going to need every mole surgically removed off of your body for a biopsy. There is a reason why Australia has such high skin cancer rates. Don't be one of them. Now this next habit seems a little bit weird, so please let me explain. But in Australia, you're going to walk differently. I know, Ross, how do you walk differently? Like, you're going to walk the same. It's not going to physically change the way that your legs move. But in the UK, most of the time when you're walking, you're just walking from one place to another. Like between locations. Especially if you live in a city, walking from one place to another is pretty common. It seems like common sense, right? Now in Australia, things are further apart. So the tendency is very often to just drive. Or use public transport. But you don't really walk because it's so far away. Now the good thing about Australia is people still do walk. But instead of just walking for transportation means, in Australia it's a lot more pleasurable. You're going to walk for fun. You're going to walk to hike. God forbid you're going to walk to lose a bit of body fat. And with the wonderful nature that there is in Australia, you're just going to walk because it's a good thing. And hopefully you don't have to rush. You can just take your time. Now this next one for British people is something that we used to do all of the time and you never even really noticed it. But in Australia, I don't really say sorry anymore. Now obviously I have manners. I'm polite. If I do something wrong, I do say sorry. Because that's the thing to do. But weirdly, British people say sorry even when they haven't done anything wrong. Even when they want to ask someone a question. Like it's imposing on their life that you need to know something. Why do British people say sorry all the time? It helps that in Australia, Australians generally are so unapologetic. But they're nice about it. They're friendly. And there's absolutely no need to say sorry all of the time. It's just weird. You notice yourself saying sorry when an Australian won't apologise back to you. So move to Australia and don't be sorry about it. Why would you want to be? And one thing I'm also not sorry about is helping people move to Australia. So if that's you and you're thinking, I want to move to this wonderful land where I don't have to apologise anymore. There's a caveat to that. Remember, you can't do anything wrong. But the wrong thing to do would be not to speak to our friends True Blue Migration Services. If you're in the early stages of thinking to move to Australia and you want to know what visa is best for you, mention us and take part in their free visa assessment. Let them tell you exactly what you need to do to move to this beautiful country and let your habits change. Every month we help so many of you realising your dreams moving to Australia, so why don't you start the process now? And when you get to Australia, another habit that's going to change for you is your eating habits. And unless you are a staunch for tradition, you're probably going to lose that Sunday roast. Why would you want to eat such a hearty, calorific, warm meal when for most of the year all you're going to want to do is sit out in the sunshine and drink a beer? I mean, I know people have beer with Sunday roasts, but that's normally one of those non-fizzy beers that's ever so slightly warmer. I've just annoyed a load of lager drinkers who drink lager with their Sunday roast. We can keep drinking the lager, there's just no need to eat all of the hot meat. Hot meat. It'll probably do good for your waistline as well. I mean, let's face it, you're probably still going to have a Sunday roast. It does remind you of back home. But unlike most people who seem to have it every week, I challenge you to keep up that habit in Australia. Another habit that's probably going to go by the wayside is having to queue all of the time. Now, how does this work, Ross? I hear you ask. Well, to be honest, it's not that you're never going to queue again. You are going to have to queue in certain circumstances, and probably more so depending on how busy it is where you live. But Australia is less densely populated, and so therefore there's going to be less queues wherever it is that you want to go. It's less busy. That's a good thing. I mean, not if you're trying to run a business maybe. But perhaps another reason why there are less queues is the Australian cultural trait of not worrying about anything. In Australia, now whenever I see a big queue and I think, what's the rush? And just leave it for tomorrow. That could be tomorrow's problem. It could be next week's problem. In Australia, you learn that you don't have to rush all the time. Do you really need to queue for something right now? The next habit that you're going to lose could probably save your life. Now, I don't know the statistics about this in the UK because I'm not that much of a geek, but I'd go as far as to say that every week in A&E, normally on the weekends, there's a significant number of people in there for fighting. That's not the habit that you're going to lose, by the way, but also another large proportion of people that are in there for some kind of DIY related injury. In Australia, you can't just do DIY all of the time. I mean, you can do some forms of DIY, but you can't do any electrical and you can't do any plumbing. Those are specially licensed trades, and if you get caught doing any of those kind of works, fines can run into the hundreds, if not thousands of dollars, and there can even be years of imprisonment. So apart from the moderate criminal record that you might receive, it might be a good idea not to do that electrical wiring that you wanted to do. I remember a time when I rewired a cooker in the UK. I electrocuted myself. It really hurt. Maybe I'll be glad to pay an electrician to wire some things for me. At least they'll do it properly. This next habit, I am a little bit sad to let it go. And by no means is this poo-pooing what's available for you in Australia at all. Poo-poo. But in Australia, I no longer change my beer drinking habits just to suit the weather. What do you mean by this? Let me explain. In the UK, during the summer, I often used to drink lager. It's very crisp and refreshing. Why would you not? I even used to have a cheeky cider every now and again in the summer. But as the nights drew in and it got ever so slightly colder, drinking a nice cold, crisp, refreshing lager didn't quite do the same. So I'd switch to an ale or a Guinness. I love Guinness. And having that ever so slightly less carbonated nature, and I guess it is a little bit warmer, but it's not that warm beer that people always take the piss about. But there was just something nice about sitting in a nice, warm, cozy pub with a pint of bitter. Now, it's not to say that you can't get bitter in Australia. You can, but it's just kind of less frequent. And the option of lagers on tap are just plentiful. But let's not forget the overarching main reason why you're not really going to want to drink it anymore, and that's because of the beautiful weather and sunshine. You're less of a slave to the climatic conditions. Of course, I'll still be weird and love the taste of a real ale, but if you think that the only beer available in Australia is Foster's, then you don't really deserve to come here. You just stay where you are, champ. Now, this one you might have picked up on, or you might have not, but in Australia, humour is a little bit different. Not in a bad way. I actually really like Australian humour, and in comparison to some cultures, like Americans, the culture between Australia and the UK is very, very similar. But some Australians don't understand dry humour. You know the kind I mean. Really deadpan, facial expressions don't change, almost to the point that when you're trying to tell a joke and you do it really seriously, you're even convincing yourself that it's really serious. Well, some Australians don't get it, and that can be a problem. Why would you want to annoy your fellow Australian? Well, sometimes it's just funny, and Australians will take every opportunity to take the piss out of you as well. But if you do it with the same dry sense of humour that you had in the UK, yeah, you could offend some people. Or if you end up offending a few along the way, don't worry about it, mate. She'll be right. Now, because Australians are so friendly, this next habit that you're going to lose can seem a bit weird, particularly if you come from a really densely populated part of the UK. I mean, to be honest, this could work for you if you came from any major city in anywhere in the world. How often did you just used to walk along, eyes focused in front of you, probably looking at somewhere on the pavement or footpath or sidewalk, depending on where you're from, and never really looking at people? You never really used to think that it was rude. You probably thought it was rude to actually look at people. But in Australia, everyone's friendly enough. So the habit of avoiding eye contact is going to be a thing of the past. Now, I know not everyone is friendly, but 60% of the time this is going to work all of the time.
That doesn't make sense.
And to any of those Australians that don't want to make eye contact, don't want to say g'day, or even casually inquire how you're going and not really care about the answer, them. They're just being rude. Don't be that rude 1%. Move over to Australia and embrace every part of all of the good habits that you're going to now have. And even if you do want to hang on to those other ones, like eating unseasonably warm things, or just being really quirky, then keep doing it. No one will really care, because that's the Australian way. But you know what is Australian? Being nosy. So if you want to know the cost of everything when you first move to Australia, then watch this video. See you later.